To understand the audacity of the mission, you must first understand the fortress, Scapa Flow. Located in the Orkney Islands, off the jagged northern tip of Scotland, Scapa Flow is a 120-square-mile natural harbor. It is a vast basin of deep, cold water, protected from the ravages of the Atlantic by a ring of windswept, treeless islands. For centuries, this was the Royal Navy's home. It was the lair from which the Grand Fleet had sailed to fight at Jutland in World War I. It was also a prison. It was here, in 1919, that the defeated German High Seas Fleet, 74 warships strong, had been interned. And it was here that their commander, Admiral von Reuter, gave the order to scuttle the entire fleet, sinking it to the bottom of the bay in a final, defiant act. The British had learned from this. They knew Scapa Flow was a prize. They knew their enemies wanted to strike it. And in 1939, they believed it was impregnable. Why? Because the 7 main entrances to the bay were a maze of defenses. The deep channels were guarded by massive anti-submarine nets, layered boom defenses, and minefields, all watched over by powerful coastal artillery batteries. No submarine could possibly get through. So what about the shallow entrances, the narrow rocky gaps between the islands? The British had sealed them. For years, they had deliberately and methodically sunk dozens of old merchant ships, called blockships, in these narrow passages. They were piled on top of each other, their rusting hulls creating a permanent steel barrier, a man-made reef just beneath the waves. It was a perfect defense. Or was it? The Royal Navy had one more guardian, the water itself. The tidal currents in these shallow channels were legendary. They didn't flow, they raced at over 10 knots. That's fast enough to rip a 700-ton submarine from its captain's control and smash it to pieces against the blockships. By any rational measure, a U-boat raid was not just risky, it was suicidal. So why, in October 1939, was the fortress not as safe as it seemed? The answer is a fatal combination of pride, paperwork, and one crucial, overlooked weakness. A new First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, had just visited and demanded a report on the defenses. The report confirmed that the eastern entrances were vulnerable. New blockships were ordered, but they were too late. The Royal Navy knew there was a flaw, but they assumed no U-boat commander would ever be skilled enough or mad enough to even try. They had forgotten who their enemy was. The plan to strike Scapa Flow was not born in a day. It was an obsession, and it was born in the mind of one man, Admiral Karl Doenitz. Doenitz was the commander of the U-boat fleet, the Befehlshaber der U-Boote. He was a brilliant, cold, and calculating strategist. But for Doenitz, Scapa Flow was not just a target. It was personal. He had been a U-boat commander himself in the First World War. He had been captured by the British and held as a prisoner of war. He knew the Royal Navy. He respected their power. And he was consumed with a desire to shatter their pride. He understood the psychology of war. Sinking merchant ships in the vast, open Atlantic, that was a war of statistics, a war of attrition. But sinking a battleship, a steel giant, a symbol of national power, in its own home, that was a war of terror. It was a blow to the enemy's heart, a shattering of their morale. It was a move that could, in a single night, change the entire narrative of the war. He pored over charts, over intelligence reports, over old ship's logs. He was looking for a weakness, and he found one. On paper, the fortress was perfect, but on the charts of the eastern approaches, in the channels between the islands, Doenitz saw the blockships, and he saw the gaps between the blockships. Specifically, in Kirk Sound, a narrow, treacherous passage, he saw a gap. Old charts showed a 50-foot wide sliver of water. Was it still there? Had the British sealed it?
He needed fresh intelligence, and he got it from the sky. In August 1939, just days before the war began, Hitler's last great airship, the Graf Zeppelin II, sister to the Hindenburg, took off on a top-secret mission. It was a 48-hour flight of pure espionage. The British, confused, scrambled Spitfires, but the massive Zeppelin simply climbed into the clouds. Ostensibly, the airship was testing the new British chain-home radar system. But as it drifted along the coast, it also flew all the way to the Orkney Islands, and it photographed Scapa Flow. The intelligence was electrifying. The photos, combined with other reports, confirmed it. The gap in Kirk Sound was still there. The blockship Thames had been sunk, but it hadn't fully sealed the passage. It was a one-in-a-million shot, a suicidal mission. The channel was shallow, it was rocky, and the tidal currents, they were not water, they were a river, racing at over 10 knots, fast enough to grab a 700-ton U-boat and smash it to pieces like a toy. Doenitz knew he could not order a crew to do this. It had to be a volunteer. He needed his very best. He needed a captain with icy nerves, pinpoint navigation skills, and almost inhuman audacity. He summoned his U-boat aces to his office in Berlin. He laid out the charts. He explained the impossible plan. One by one, the top commanders looked at the charts, at the currents, at the blockships, and they refused. It was suicide. Finally, Doenitz called in a 31-year-old Captain Lieutenant, a man who was aggressive, skilled, and a product of the merchant marine, not the aristocratic navy. He was a pragmatist. His name was Günther Prien. Prien's crew called him the Bull for his relentless, charging, and often stubborn nature. Prien looked at the same charts. He saw the same risks. He saw the deadly current, the sunken wrecks, and the narrow gap. Doenitz asked him if it could be done. Prien, with chilling simplicity, studied the map for a long time. Then he looked up. "I will try." He was given just days to prepare. He was given the U-47, a standard Type 7B U-boat. A small, cramped Wolfpack boat, not a long-range cruiser. Prien told his crew nothing, except that they were going on a special operation, and that it was of the highest importance. As the U-47 was being provisioned, one of his crew members, with a laugh, painted a snorting bull on the conning tower. It would become the most famous emblem in the German Navy. On October 8, 1939, the U-47 slipped its moorings in Kiel and headed for the Orkneys. On board, Prien carried a bottle of brandy, a gift from Doenitz, to be opened if they succeeded.
The night of October 13, 1939, the U-47 arrives at the mouth of Kirk Sound. The weather is, perversely, perfect. There is no moon, the sky is black. But then, as Prien raises his binoculars, his heart sinks. The sky begins to flicker. A pale, ghostly green and purple light dances across the horizon. The Aurora Borealis, the northern lights. In his log, Prien would curse it as cursed stage lighting. At any moment, this beautiful, ethereal glow could illuminate his 220-foot-long submarine to a sentry on the shore. But there is no turning back. The tide is right. It is now or never. Prien makes the most terrifying decision of the night. He will go in on this surface. Why? Why not sneak in submerged and silent? The answer is twofold. First, the channel is terrifyingly shallow. If he submerged, he would risk grounding himself on the rocky bottom or on a wreck he couldn't see. Second, the current. The 10-knot tide was so violent he needed his full, roaring diesel engine power just to fight it.
His silent, weak electric motors wouldn't stand a chance. This meant he would be loud and he would be visible. At 12:27 a.m., October 14th, Prien gives the order. Enter Kirk Sound. The helmsman grips the wheel, his knuckles white. The engine telegraphs clatter, the diesel engines rumble. The U-47 noses its way into the churning, black water. The nightmare begins. Prien is on the conning tower, in the open air, with the wind and spray in his face. He is screaming orders. The channel is barely wider than the U-boat. The current is a living thing, grabbing the submarine, trying to swing it broadside into the rocks. Starboard 10, port 15, full ahead. Suddenly, a lookout screams, "Ship, dead ahead!" A dark, jagged shape, the bow of one of the sunken blockships, the Thames. It is right in their path. Hard to starboard. The U-boat swings, but it's not enough. Scrape! A horrific, deafening shriek of metal on metal. The U-47 lurches violently, throwing the crew inside to the deck. They are stuck. They have run aground. On the blockship's anchor chain. For a split second, there is total silence. They are trapped. A sitting duck. Inside the enemy's main naval base. A single searchlight, a single rifle shot, would be the end. Prien is calm. Full astern, full ahead, hard to port. He rocks the U-boat. Like a car stuck in snow, the diesel engines scream in protest. The hull groans. And then, with another lurch, she's free. Prien doesn't hesitate. Full ahead. He scrapes past the first wreck, then a second. The U-47 is through the gap. At 12:55 a.m., the U-47 glides silently into the main basin of Scapa Flow. They are in. Prien scans the vast, empty harbor with his binoculars, and his blood runs cold. It's empty. Where is the fleet? Where are the battleships, the carriers, the cruisers? He can't believe it. By sheer dumb luck, the bulk of the British home fleet had sailed just days before, moved to a safer base at Loch E, while the Scapa Flow defenses were being strengthened. The entire mission, the risk, the scrape, the terror, was it all for nothing? Prien turns the U-47 north, his disappointment bitter. But then, a lookout. Shadows! To port! Prien swings his binoculars. There. Two massive black shapes at anchor, silhouetted against the northern shore. One is a smaller ship, the aircraft carrier HMS Pegasus. The other is a giant, a 29,000-ton Revenge-class battleship. It is the HMS Royal Oak. Prien has his target. He maneuvers the U-47 into a perfect firing position, just 3,000 yards away. Bow tubes 1 to 4. Stand by. Fire. 4 torpedoes leap from the U-boat. Their steam engines leave a trail of bubbles. The crew inside begins to count. 1, 2, 3. They wait. An agonizing 2 minutes pass. Boom! A single, muffled explosion far in the distance. Prien sees a plume of water. He's hit. But on the Royal Oak, something strange is happening. Or rather, nothing is happening. The crew feels a dull thud, a tremor. The captain, Walter Ben, wakes up. Sailors on the deck check the anchor chain. They think it might have snapped or there was a problem. A small internal explosion is suspected, maybe a refrigerator in the galley. No one believes it's a U-boat. The harbor is impregnable. A loudspeaker announcement is made. All hands check for damage. And then they go back to sleep. On the U-47, Prien is confused. He's furious. Did he miss? Did 3 of his torpedoes fail? He saw an explosion. Why isn't the ship sinking? Why are there no alarms? He has a choice. His mission is technically complete. He hit a battleship. He could escape. But Günther Prien is the bull. He is not leaving. He turns the U-47 around in a wide, slow circle in the middle of the enemy harbor. He waits for 20 agonizing minutes as his crew, his sweating, terrified, and heroic crew, reloads the bow torpedoes. Imagine the sound, the clanging of metal, the whining of hoists, the noise of reloading, all while surrounded by an enemy fleet that is, somehow, still asleep. This is the single most audacious act of the entire war. At 1:16 a.m., Prien is back in position. Bow tubes 1, 2, and 4. Fire. This time, he fires 3 torpedoes. This time, there is no mistake. The torpedoes streak across the water. They strike the Royal Oak directly amidships in a tight, devastating cluster. They tear through the battleship's unarmored hull, and they find the magazine. The explosion is catastrophic. It is beyond imagination. A column of brilliant, hot white fire blasts hundreds of feet into the air, illuminating the entire harbor like daylight. The 29,000-ton battleship is physically lifted out of the water. On board, it is an apocalypse. The ship is plunged into total blackness as all power is lost. She begins to capsize, to roll completely over almost immediately. In the blackness, men, many of them boy cadets as young as 15, are trapped. The ship's internal layout becomes a vertical steel coffin. From the first explosion to the moment she vanished, it took just 13 minutes. 835 men and boys were dead. The fortress had been breached. The giant was slain.
On the bridge of the U-47, Prien watches the fireball. He writes 2 words in his log: torp hit, sinking. He does not wait to watch the aftermath. He knows all hell is about to break loose. "Hard to starboard! Full power! Get us out!" The U-47 turns, its diesel engines roaring, and races back toward the only exit, Kirk Sound. Behind him, Scapa Flow finally erupts. Searchlights stab the darkness. Klaxons wail. Destroyers, now frantic, fire up their engines. They begin dropping depth charges, but it's pure panic. They are dropping them in the deep channels, to the south and west. They still don't believe, they can't believe, anyone would be mad enough to use Kirk Sound. Prien is racing for the gap. But now he has a new problem. The tide has turned. It is now rushing into the harbor against him. He is fighting a 10-knot river and the entire Royal Navy. And then the worst possible thing happens. On the shore, a car, a simple civilian car, or perhaps a naval vehicle, is racing towards the Sound. Its headlights sweep across the water and illuminate the U-47 perfectly. They are seen. Prien is a sitting duck, silhouetted against the dark water. "Alarm! Dive! Dive!" Prien and his lookouts tumble down the conning tower hatch. He gives an order that should be impossible. He dives in a channel that is supposed to be too shallow to submerge. The U-boat plunges. Scrape! The U-boat's belly hits the rocky seabed. It grinds, it bounces, but Prien keeps the engines churning. He is scraping his way along the bottom, blind, using the blockships and the rocks as a shield. At 2:15 a.m., the U-47, battered, scraped, but victorious, pops out into the open sea. Prien is free. He had done the impossible. When the sun rose over Scapa Flow, the British were confronted with an unthinkable, horrific sight. The Royal Oak was gone. In her place, a widening, black slick of fuel oil and the upturned, barnacled keel of the giant ship sticking out of the water like a tombstone. The news was a devastating, humiliating shock to the British public and to the Royal Navy. Their navy was not safe, even in its own home. Winston Churchill was forced to stand up in Parliament and admit the catastrophic failure. He called it a remarkable feat of professional skill and daring. Scapa Flow, the heart of the fleet, was immediately abandoned for months until the blockships could be permanently sealed, this time with concrete. But in Germany, Günther Prien returned not just as a hero. He returned as a legend. Admiral Doenitz, who had been waiting by the radio for 2 days, received the simple message: U-boat 47, mission complete. Prien was flown to Berlin. He and his entire crew were met at the airfield by Hitler himself. He was personally awarded the Knight's Cross, the first U-boat commander to receive it. Prien became a superstar, the bull of Scapa Flow. His face was on every newspaper. He was a propaganda icon, a symbol of German skill and audacity. His daring raid, a 1 in a million shot built on a sliver of intelligence and an ocean of nerve, had changed the psychological landscape of the war. The Royal Oak, the mighty battleship, had been sunk by a single, determined bull. And the legend of the U-boat aces, the legend that would haunt the Atlantic for the next 4 years, was born in the cold, dark, and supposedly impossible waters of Scapa Flow. If you enjoyed this incredible story of audacity and engineering, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of forgotten history. And if you want to see how the Allies finally fought back against the U-boat aces, click the video on screen now to learn about the hunter-killer groups that turned the Atlantic into a graveyard. Let me know your thoughts on this raid in the comments below.